We get some insights into a tough family squabble tonight. And it's a whole lot more than a squabble. It's a very important court case, and it's got to do with life and death and all of that. Attorney David Bizarre is my guest this evening. He's volunteered his time to try to advocate for one party, and it's welcome, and I'm looking forward to his explanation of the case. And we'll get to that, and we need to have some time to dig into it in just a matter of moments. But let us join the rundown as we do each and every evening. And just highlight some of the things I'd like to discuss with you here tonight. The National Hall of Shame, that's a new theme of a political campaign. Democrats making a deal, I'm not so sure they will. Reportedly, they are trying. Those are the gubernatorial candidates. This is a ridiculous story. I had no idea how far the kids have got to walk to get to school. The potholes are at an all-time terrible state, it seems to me, but there's a solution. There really is. And there's a bunch of keys to the city in Cranston out there. Varying opinions as to how many there ought to be. Let's get into it and break down some of our thoughts on the rundown this evening. The National Hall of Shame. Ken Block had his kickoff at TACO today. He's been running for governor for months and months. In fact, he's the first one to announce moderate turned Republican running against Alan Fung. Alan Fung announced his campaign at TACO in Cranston, John Hazen White Jr.'s company, 500 plus employees, a real success story. Big rehab over there. They've got a multi-million-dollar facility that's called a learning center where people come and speak and the like. And it's become Switzerland in the political campaign, at least on the Republican side, because now both candidates running for governor have used the facility for their big announcement. Ken Block had an interesting concept that he put at the front of his speech today. Let me, Steve will put this up on a graphic. I want to see this. Today, Rhode Island is in crisis. We are in peril. And Rhode Island is the leading member of the National Hall of Shame, he put in quotes. Those are his words. There is no real National Hall of Shame, but it's a way of articulating how low we are here in Rhode Island. I'm going to run some video here of him saying it, and then I ask him a question about whether or not that's on the mark.
Rhode Island is in the National Hall of Shame. For me, for the team, it was tremendously important to highlight the nature of the urgency of the problem, because there are too many people in our government, including our current governor, who do not appear to understand how bad it is. And you have to define a problem before you can fix it. And I'm sorry that it was a bleak picture when we defined this problem, but our situation is bleak. The fix is straightforward, but the urgency and the definition of the problem was incredibly important to do.
Block has a lot of ideas on the fix, and some of them are actually brilliant, and we'll lay them out over the course of time. But the idea that he's suggesting that the entire state leads to the National Hall of Shame is a terrible campaign message and a disaster for his campaign, and will thwart all of what he brings to the table. So let me just make an unsolicited consultation to Ken Block and his team. Knock it off. You can say that the leaders are shameful. You can say that something is shameful. You can say shame, shame, shame on a TV show or radio show all you want. But think about this. When you're a parent and you're yelling at your kids and you're making no headway, that's one thing. If you turn to your kid and say, listen, I'm ashamed of you, that's it's a power word. Shame is a power word. And I will tell you, it's overkill in a campaign. The general election and the general electorate will not suffer well the idea that the place is shameful. Self-deprecating, I understand. I understand that we think we got a long hill to climb. But you use that word, by the way, his opponents will use it against him. I'm bullish on Rhode Island. He's ashamed of Rhode Island. Bad move. Don't do it anymore. We'll see if they listen to me. I think they're mad at me for my radio discussion of this today. I really just call it the way I see it, Ken. You're a good candidate. Don't blow it. Let's move on. Dems making a deal. Speaking of candidates, the Democrats are trying to figure out how to agree on outside money infiltrating the campaigns. The Providence Journal headline here, Democrats submit plans that would limit the outside money. You remember John Marion from Common Cause? He is moderating a conversation between Angel Tavares and Gina Raimondo and Clay Pell and the other guy, Mr. Giroux, is not in the conversation. He's a candidate, but not a serious one as a contender. Anyway, they're all working out some kind of a plan on this kind of stuff. Here was John on the show a couple of weeks back.
They're going to sign this. The candidates themselves are going to sign this. So they need to own it. So it's got to be something that they all want. I'm just going to emphasize, don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. Let's get something here that, you know, Brown-Warren, that pledge wasn't perfect, but it was good enough to get the job done.
The pledge is this, real simple. If an outside super PAC spends $1,000 saying that Angel Tavares and Gina Raimondo are no good in support of Clay Pell, then Clay Pell has got to take $500, half of that amount, and donate it to charity, kind of as a penalty. It's supposed to encourage super PACs from getting in the middle of the campaign. The candidates aren't agreeing. And I don't have all the time in the world here tonight to be able to tell you who's got a little nuance different than the next, but it was Angel Tavares' idea to do the pledge. And what's interesting is that Gina Raimondo reportedly wants a larger pledge than even Angel wants. And Clay wants a little less. It's very, very interesting. And we'll follow that more as we go. The next item on the rundown here this evening is just ridiculous. I mean, when I saw this, I almost fell over. The Journal headline, following in the students' footsteps. Here's a young lady talking to Eyewitness News about how hard it is to get to school.
I try to walk on the icy sidewalk, but it just doesn't work out sometimes because I usually fall into the middle of the street. And I remember this one time I almost got crashed by a car.
I did not realize this. In the city of Providence, you can't get a bus provided by the system or a subsidy on RIPTA. I like to say that, RIPTA. Unless you are more than 3 miles away from the high school. Now, how would you like to get up at 6 o'clock in the morning in 4-degree weather with snow this high, potholes and ice all over Kingdom Come, and get to school? They wonder why they've had a high non-attendance rate. They still say, well, listen, we've tried to do some things for transportation for the kids in the past, and it hasn't improved the attendance rate. Come on. You know, inner city kids are so discriminated against when it comes to opportunity. It's ridiculous to think that you can't find a solution that every kid over a mile, mile and a half has a way to get to school, no charge. Come on, come on. This might be a real Achilles heel for Angel Tavares and the entire school system in Providence. 3 miles? Look, I know the old adage, we all walked uphill 4 feet of snow both ways, where men were men and sheep were sheep, but we don't throw the mileage in, do we? No, because it wasn't 3 miles. There are 1,800 kids that walk between 2 and 3 miles to school, or don't get transportation subsidy for it. Fix that. Next. Speaking of stepping in potholes and all that kind of stuff, you know, there's been a lot of attention for it, and the mayor has identified this as the worst he can recall type year for potholes. That's WPRI.com story. I don't have to show you potholes, but I will, because they're all over the place, and it's like playing dodgeball out there with your car, no doubt. What happens here is that they take that cold patch. I think we've got a little cold patch picture here any minute now. There you go. They take that stuff, they just throw it in the hole, and they move on. Well, Carl Wadenston from Vibeco, the Vibeco company in Wyoming. He's the guy that was he's on the Economic Development Corporation, now known as the Commerce Department, but he runs a company with vibrators, like big machines. And he wants to volunteer and give equipment that would make the cold patch actually work. Listen to what he told me on the radio on Friday.
We told some people in the Tavares camp that we'll come up to Providence and show them how to use this equipment. They can take our equipment for free, Dan. Just take it. Because a good deed for our state is take the equipment, use it, learn how to help the citizens, and we'll sell stuff just because Rhode Island's showing how to use this stuff. I don't need money from my own hometown state. Let me take it from somewhere else. That's the exponential factor.
It's a $1,500 piece of equipment. Mayor, would you borrow it from Carl, please, and fix the potholes? And last item. This is Jess. She tells me, you know what, there's too many keys to the city out there. I'm like, what are you talking about? In Cranston. So Marissa Castelli just got the keys to the city. Is there some kind of a note here or a headline? Sure. She did us proud. She celebrated. She got a gold medal as part of the team competition in Sochi in figure skating. But she is one of 4. Here she is. She's getting the key to the city with a nice little ceremony in town the other day. Nice. Beautiful. I love that hometown stuff. But my esteemed producer, Jessica Silva was telling me today that she thinks that there might be a few too many keys out there, so she listed them for me. We have pictures. Can we show that? Thank you, Steve. The girl on the left is the actual local designer of the key. And then there's Ms. Colpo, who won the Miss Universe, and then there's Ms. Castelli on the right-hand side. And in the second picture there is Sergeant Gregory Gutter, who served in Afghanistan. Let's put it this way. There are a lot of keys to the city out there. I love keys to the city, but you have to admit, the other guy in the picture is Alan Fung, and it's always a great opportunity to smile for the camera. This debate shall continue at another interval when I get the antagonist on here to talk about it in some way. All right, when we come back, on a much more serious note, just a devastating story continues in the courts. We'll break it down for you and see if there's any kind of light at the end of the tunnel. Stay with us. On both the radio and the television, we've been following this very tragic case. The headline and update is right here. Hearing delayed in dispute over murder teen's burial. And I hate to be nonchalant and move through these headlines like it's, the rundown, because a life was lost tragically. Rather than me explaining it, let me run the latest that Eyewitness News ran last night. You went through the funeral procedures, the whole thing. You had the service on February 10th. Correct. Well, that segment, that piece of video we'll use in a little bit, but here was Eyewitness News last night.
It's been nearly 3 weeks since George Holland Jr. was gunned down at his girlfriend's home in Providence, but the boy's body is still in limbo.
I'm tired. I just want this over with.
Leah Seaton is George's aunt. She became his legal guardian after the boy's mother was convicted of killing his father. Seaton wants to bury George with his father.
I just want him laid to rest with his dad.
But George's mother, Shayna Rufo, wants his body to be cremated. Gina Bly is Shayna's sister. She spoke on Shayna's behalf outside of court.
Why can't she have her say? That is her child, not theirs. I don't care what the state said because of the circumstances. That is her child. She needs to have the last say how her son is put to rest.
On the day of George's funeral, Seaton says Key Funeral Home told her they would not be able to bury George's body. 2 weeks ago, Seaton was granted a temporary restraining order to prevent the funeral home from cremating the boy's remains.
Just gut-wrenching, and we've covered this conversation. We had Leah Seaton, who's a legal guardian and aunt of the young man, and his cousin on the broadcast. David Bizarre is the local attorney here in East Providence. Welcome to the broadcast.
Thank you.
Thanks. You see him in the piece. Long story short, tell us how you got involved in this.
So I came home from work. I think, did you have her on Friday?
Thursday, I think, on the radio. Middle last week.
Whatever it was.
Yeah.
I came home and my wife said to me, I heard this story on the radio and it's going to really mean something to you. You have to listen to the podcast. So she played the podcast for me. And she knows how I feel about children, and she knows how I love interesting things in the law. I love the law, and it's what got me through law school. I was one of those unusual guys who really liked the study of the law. So we went to the URI basketball game, and you were doing the public address before the game, and she's hitting me with her elbow in the ribs. You got to go down and talk to him. You got to go down and talk to him. So I went down and I talked to you.
And so I put David together with the family. Thank you for your response, because we had solicited, because the families just can't afford an attorney right now, and they're in the midst of a brouhaha, as it's been explained there. We're going to get into the facts of the case here in just a second, but and some of the arguments that you're making on behalf of Leah Seaton, the legal guardian. But you mentioned actually to Eyewitness News yesterday that there's no precedent for this case, that this is not one that you could look up and go, I know how to fix this one, right?
That's absolutely true. And so my wife, who had prodded me to do this, as I'm doing the research on it, says, well, find some precedent from other states and find something. So I did research. You have to find a case where there's a minor 17-year-old child who's killed tragically, a case where there's a mother in prison for killing the father, so the father's no longer around. And that is not a factual pattern that comes to the Supreme Court of many states too often. So there hasn't been any actual precedent from case law that I found. I have found a similar case in New York where a young fellow, Miles Dobson, 4 years old, was tragically killed by his babysitter. The father had custody of that child, and the father was in jail waiting hearing on a bank fraud charge. And even though he had custody, since he was in prison, the courts did not let him claim the child or make the funeral arrangements. So it got me thinking along the lines of the arguments I'm making in this case.
I'm going to pause here, and when we come back, we'll talk about the complication, how the funeral home's kind of stuck in the middle, being sued, and what the projection might be for a resolve. Stay with us. You went through the funeral procedures, the whole thing. You had the service on February 10th.
Correct.
And in the middle of the service, you found out what?
We found out that we were unable to lay George to rest.
But you actually went through all the motions that day.
Correct.
You went to the cemetery,
Yes.
right? Because you felt...
We didn't want to disrupt anyone else's giving respects to George.
The reason this has occurred is because George's natural mother, who is in jail
Yes.
for the murder of your brother,
Yes.
George's father, 5 years ago,
Yes.
got word out that she wants him cremated, correct?
Yes.
Awful, awful, awful. And the reason, the way she got the word out, is I learned from the funeral home owner, was that she actually had visited George in his casket prior to the public wake and exclaimed that she wanted him cremated. And the funeral home on its own made a decision, even without counsel, that the natural mother has the jurisdiction over the custody of the remains, God forbid a minor passes away.
So there's a statute in Rhode Island that lays out who has that right. And it starts with spouse, and at that time domestic partner was listed, although when we changed the Marriage Equality Act, some of those languages might get cleaned up at some point in time. But then it goes down to parents when you have a minor child in this situation, or any situation where the other people who would have the right to do it aren't involved. So that's where the nursing home, the funeral home started with this issue that she has the right. She was visiting, by the way, because the ACI policy, the prison policy, is that someone who's in prison can go to a funeral on a furlough, escorted by guards at off hours. So she barely has the right to even attend a funeral, never mind make these decisions.
Nobody wants to, no matter incarceration or not, nobody wants to get in the middle of a relationship between a natural mother and a son. But this is so peculiar that the natural mother is convicted of killing the now deceased son's dad.
Right.
The family wants to bury them together. And now you have picked up the case to argue. You were in court yesterday. It got stayed by a week because the funeral home showed up without an attorney. They need one as a corporation. But I think it was a good bad break. It was a bad break for the family that needs this whole thing resolved. It was a good break for you because you could do some more research and make some arguments for next Monday, correct?
That is correct. And there are a number of interesting issues that need to be laid out for the judge. And I know the judge had to continue this case because the corporation needs to be represented by an attorney. But it gives us a chance to lay out in memo form to the judge a couple of key issues. Number one, the statute says what it says, but that's assuming that the mom has a legal capacity to make any decisions for this child. And as an incarcerated person, she has certain civil disabilities. She doesn't have the right to vote. She doesn't have the right to make a will, to enter into a contract, to sell property. So when you're in prison, you can't do certain things. And one of the things we're arguing is you don't have the right to make decisions for your child.
Well, it's a tough one, depending on what part of the family that you're in. In summary, because I'd like to have you back after this whole thing plays out, win or lose. And there's no winners in this case.
Right.
There's just so much tragedy involved in it. But at the end of the day, I think a judge who might be looking down an appellate road of some kind would rather err on the side of burial, because that can be reversed. Cremation cannot be.
Well, that's absolutely correct. And in this case, if you wanted to argue that there is an irreversible error to be made, it's to cremate this child. If you bury the child and the appellate court then looks at it and finds something was amiss in the decision, they can always have the body exhumed and cremated at that point.
All right. Your stepping up, and your expertise, I'm sure, is well appreciated by the family, and I think appreciated by people in the community who have reacted to this on both radio and television by saying, oh, blessing themselves, thinking, please, just bring some rest to this young man who was in the wrong place at the wrong time, a family that's had too much strife. So thank you for stepping up and helping.
Thank you for putting me in touch with them, because this is a wonderful family. Leah Seaton has done a great job with that child when he was alive, and I think she's trying to do the right thing by him now. All
right, we'll check back in with David as this case proceeds. Your state of mind when we come back. Stay with us. You know, that case that we've been covering is such a heartbreak. At minimum, I just ask for your prayers for the family on both sides of the argument, because you can understand where each of their arguments are, but as this young man's life was moving on so successfully, he was being mentored and guarded by a legal guardian who is also trying to respect what the rest of the family wants. They want to be able to visit young George Holland next to his father, George Holland, and I think you can understand why. We'll follow the case all the way to its end. Let us check your state of mind real quick here. You can call us on this case or anything that we do on the program at 228-1886 and leave a voicemail or email me or Facebook post or tweet. And here's a Facebook post that we picked up from a recent show. Susan says, excellent segment with Dan Beardsley. He's the guy who runs the League of Cities and Towns, providing a clear explanation regarding the seriousness of the financial consequences to towns. This is all about the pension settlement. We got a picture of Dan Beardsley. He did do a nice job and laid it out pretty clearly. He, like me, agrees that this settlement of the pension case should be in trial. We'll follow that too. I gotta go. We'll see you tomorrow night on Your State of Mind.